This book was written in 1937. It has sold over 100 million copies across nearly every country on Earth. It has been cited by more self-made millionaires, billionaires, and world leaders than almost any other book in existence. And yet, most people who read it completely miss the most important thing inside it. Because they read it like a business book. It is not a business book. It never was. Napoleon Hill was not a businessman. He was a journalist. In 1908, Andrew Carnegie, at the time the wealthiest man in the world, gave Hill an assignment that would consume the next 20 years of his life. Study success, not the results of success, the cause of it. Carnegie opened every door. Hill sat across from Edison, from Ford, from Rockefeller, from over 500 of the most accomplished people in America at the height of their power. He wasn't studying their strategies. He wasn't studying their industries. He was studying the pattern underneath all of it. The thing they all had in common that nobody was talking about. What he found was not comfortable. Because it wasn't about talent. It wasn't about connections or timing or luck, though those things played a role. What every single one of them shared was a particular relationship with their own mind, a way of thinking that the average person simply did not have, not because they were born with it, but because they had, consciously or unconsciously, developed it. Hill spent another decade trying to understand exactly what that way of thinking was, how it worked, whether it could be taught. Think and Grow Rich was his answer. The title is deliberate: Think and Grow Rich, not Work and Grow Rich, not Grind and Grow Rich, not Hustle and Grow Rich. Think. That one word is the entire argument of the book compressed into a single instruction. Hill's central thesis is that everything, every result, every circumstance, every version of your life begins as a thought. And the reason most people stay exactly where they are is not because they lack ability. It is because they are thinking by accident, running on mental programs they never chose, towards outcomes they never consciously decided on, living someone else's version of a life while believing it is their own. Most people come to this book looking for steps, a formula, 5 things successful people do before 6 a.m., and Hill does give you principles, 13 of them, but the mistake is treating them like a checklist. Because the principles are not the point, they are the outer layer. Underneath each one is something Hill is actually trying to get you to understand about the architecture of your own mind, how it creates, how it self-sabotages, how it can be deliberately reprogrammed to produce a completely different quality of life. That is what this book is really about. So if you have read Think and Grow Rich before and felt like you got something from it but nothing really changed, this is why. You read the map but never made the journey. You understood it intellectually but never let it land at the level where it actually operates. The subconscious, the identity, the deep pattern of thought running underneath everything you do and every result you produce. That is where this book lives. And that is where this overview is going. Over the next parts, we are going to break down the principles that actually matter. Not the surface-level summaries you have already seen, the real architecture underneath them, the parts that are hiding in plain sight because they sound too simple to take seriously. Hill knew what he was doing. He embedded the most important ideas in the most unassuming language because he understood that the conscious mind rejects what it cannot immediately categorize. He needed it to slip past your defenses. If you are paying attention, it will. Let us start with the principle Hill called the starting point of all achievement, the one that makes everything else possible. The beginning of all achievement. That is how Hill described it. Not one of the principles, not a useful tool. The beginning. The thing without which none of the rest of it works. And yet when most people pick up this book, they skip straight past it. Because it sounds too simple, too obvious, too much like something they already know. They don't. Nobody does. Until they actually stop and sit with what Hill was really saying. Before we get into the principle itself, understand the context Hill was operating in. He had spent 2 decades studying the minds of the most successful people in history. He had sat across from Edison, from Ford, from Rockefeller, and the question he kept asking was the same every time. What was the first cause? Not the strategy, not the industry, not the timing, the first cause, the thing that existed before any of it. And every single one of them pointed him to the same place. The mind, specifically, a particular quality of mind that they had all cultivated, deliberately or unconsciously. It didn't matter. The pattern was identical. Hill called it desire. But he was very careful about how he defined that word, because he knew most people would hear it and think of wanting something, a wish, a preference, a vague aspiration they entertain while doing nothing about it. That is not what he meant. Hill's definition of desire was almost violent in its intensity. He described it as a burning obsession, a white-hot fixation on a definite outcome that consumes the thinking so completely that the mind begins reorganizing itself around it. Every thought filtered through it, every decision measured against it, every obstacle evaluated as either a barrier or a detour, never a reason to stop. This is the distinction that separates the people Hill studied from everyone else. Most people want things. The people in Hill's research had decided on things, and those are not the same state of mind at all. Wanting is passive. It sits and hopes. It waits for conditions to improve. It requires motivation to get started and gives up when motivation fades. Deciding is different. Deciding is a structural change in how the mind organizes itself. Once you have truly decided, not wished, not hoped, not planned, but decided, the mind stops negotiating with the outcome. It starts engineering toward it. Every resource, every observation, every connection gets filtered through that lens. Hill called this the transmutation of desire into its physical equivalent, the thought becoming the thing. There is something underneath this that Hill embedded carefully because he knew it would be dismissed if stated too directly. He believed that a burning desire, held with enough clarity and intensity, begins to communicate with something beyond the individual mind. He called it infinite intelligence, the same source that every great inventor, artist, and builder throughout history had tapped into without necessarily understanding how. The idea that arrived fully formed, the solution that appeared in the half-sleep between night and morning, the sudden clarity that came from nowhere and changed everything. Hill did not think this was mystical. He thought it was mechanical, a law as consistent as gravity. Apply the right conditions, clarity, intensity, faith, persistence, and the intelligence responds, every time. So the first question this book is asking you is not what do you want? That question is too weak. The question is, what have you decided? What outcome have you fixed your mind to with enough intensity that you think about it when you wake up and when you go to sleep? That occupies your thinking when you are supposed to be thinking about something else. That makes every comfortable alternative feel like a betrayal of something important. If you do not have an answer to that, nothing else in this book will work for you. The later principles are tools, but tools need a direction. Desire is the direction. Without it, you are just carrying equipment with nowhere to go. But desire alone is not enough. Hill was clear about that. Because the mind has a mechanism that will undermine even the most burning desire if you do not understand how to work with it. That mechanism is next. In part 2, we talked about the mastermind, the third mind that forms between two people operating in genuine harmony around a definite purpose. But Hill was careful to tell you something before all of that, before the mastermind, before the principles, before any of it. He told you that none of it works without this, the first principle, the one he placed at the very foundation of everything else. He called it the starting point of all achievement, and he called it desire. But before you switch off because you think you already know what desire means, stay with this. Because Hill opens this chapter with a story, and he chose this story deliberately. Not because it is inspiring, because it proves something about the nature of desire that most people spend their entire lives not understanding. The story is about his son. Blair Hill was born without ears, no auditory apparatus whatsoever. Every doctor who examined him told Napoleon Hill the same thing. Your son will never hear. Your son will never speak normally. Prepare yourself for that reality. Hill refused, not because he was delusional, but because he had a burning desire for a different outcome. And he believed, based on everything he had studied, that desire of sufficient intensity could find a way where no way appeared to exist. What Hill did next is the practical application of everything in this chapter. He did not wait for a medical breakthrough. He did not accept the limitation as permanent. He began, from the moment Blair was old enough to engage, transmitting to his son the belief that he would hear, not through lectures, not through motivational speeches, through deliberate, consistent, emotionally charged repetition. He would hold Blair close and speak directly into the area where ears should have been. He told him stories. He gave him experiences. He built in the boy a burning desire to hear, to speak, to live a full life before any physical mechanism existed to make that possible. Years later, Blair Hill began to hear. Partially at first, then more. A device was eventually found that worked for his specific condition, but Hill believed the device was found because the desire existed first. Because the intention had been held with enough intensity and faith that it began attracting the means of its own fulfillment. Now, Hill is not telling you this story to make you feel good. He is telling it to establish something precise about how desire actually operates. Because the desire he is describing is not the same thing as wanting. Wanting is the condition most people live in permanently. They want better health. They want more money. They want different relationships. They want to feel more alive. And they remain exactly where they are. Because wanting is passive. It sits. It hopes. It waits for external conditions to change before it commits to the outcome. Hill's desire is different. It is a decision made so completely and held so consistently that the mind stops treating the outcome as a possibility and starts treating it as an inevitability that has not yet physically arrived. The difference in the internal experience of those two states is the difference between your entire life going one way or another. Hill gives you 6 specific steps for transmuting desire into its physical equivalent, and I want to go through these carefully, because most summaries rush past them. The first step, fix in your mind the exact amount of money you desire. Hill is specific about money because it was the context of his research, but substitute whatever your definite purpose is. The specificity is the point. Not more money, not financial freedom, an exact number, an exact outcome, something the mind can actually fix itself to. The second step, determine exactly what you intend to give in return. Hill was adamant about this. There is no something for nothing in this system. Every desired outcome has a price, not necessarily financial, but a price in time, effort, sacrifice, focus, identity. Know yours before you proceed. The third step, establish a definite date. Not eventually, not soon. A date. Again, the specificity is what separates this from wishful thinking. The mind responds to concrete targets in a way it never responds to vague intentions. The fourth step, create a definite plan and begin at once, whether you are ready or not. This is perhaps the most important instruction in the entire chapter, whether you are ready or not, because readiness is a feeling. And waiting for a feeling is how most people spend their lives. The fifth step, write it out, the definite amount, the time limit, what you will give, the plan. Write it as a clear, concise statement. Hill believed the act of writing was itself a commitment mechanism, a signal from the conscious mind to the subconscious that this is real, this is decided, this is not negotiable. The sixth step: read the statement aloud twice daily, once before sleep, once after waking. And as you read it, see yourself already in possession of the outcome. Feel it. Hill was describing what we would now call neurological reprogramming, the consistent, emotionally charged repetition of a desired outcome until the subconscious mind accepts it as reality and begins organizing behavior and perception around it automatically. Now, here is where most people fall down with this principle. And Hill knew they would, which is why he addresses it directly. He says, if you are one of those people who believe that hard work and honesty alone will bring riches, perish the thought. Because that belief is a form of limitation masquerading as virtue. Hard work without direction is just exhaustion with a clear conscience. Honesty without strategy is just integrity in poverty. Hill is not telling you those things do not matter. He is telling you they are not sufficient. The missing variable, always, is the burning desire for a definite outcome, held with enough intensity and faith that it begins to reshape everything around it. The people who work the hardest are often not the people who achieve the most. The people who want something so specifically and so completely that their entire mental and physical system reorganizes itself around producing it. Those are the people the world cannot ignore. There is something underneath this principle that Hill embeds quietly, but clearly, for those paying attention. He talks about the relationship between desire and what he calls the subconscious mind, and infinite intelligence. And this is where the book stops being a business book and starts being something else entirely. Hill believed that the subconscious mind is the connecting link between the finite mind of man and infinite intelligence. That beneath your conscious thinking, beneath the narrative you run about who you are and what is possible for you, there is a layer of mind that operates according to completely different rules. A layer that does not know the difference between what is real and what is vividly imagined. A layer that accepts as true whatever the conscious mind presents to it with enough repetition and emotional intensity. And once accepted, it begins working toward that truth with a precision and resourcefulness that the conscious mind alone could never match. This is the mechanism behind the 6 steps. This is why Hill insists on the daily reading, the emotional engagement, the vivid visualization. He is not giving you a motivation technique. He is giving you an instruction manual for communicating with a part of your own mind that most people never consciously access in their entire lives. Hill makes one more observation in this chapter that I think is the most important thing he says. He talks about poverty consciousness versus wealth consciousness. And again, substitute your own definite purpose for wealth if that is not yours. The point is the principle. He says that most people accept poverty, or mediocrity, or limitation, or smallness, not because they choose it consciously, but because they have never made a conscious choice about it at all. They inherited a framework, a set of beliefs about what is possible for someone like them, from their family, their environment. So, here is what this actually looks like in practice. Not the abstract version, the real version. You sit down tonight and you write out your definite purpose. Not a goal list, not a vision board. One thing. The thing. The outcome that when you imagine it fully realized produces a physical response in your body, not just a thought in your head. You write the exact outcome, the exact date, what you will give for it. The plan you have right now, even if it is incomplete. You read it when you wake up and before you sleep. You do not read it passively. You read it, and you allow yourself to feel what it would feel like to already have it. Every single day. Without missing. Without deciding it is not working. Without letting a week of slow progress talk you out of a decision that operates on a longer timeline. Hill is not promising you it will be easy. He is telling you it will be inevitable. If the desire is real. If the decision is complete. If the repetition is consistent, the subconscious will find the way. It always does. But there is a problem, and Hill addresses it in the very next chapter. Because even with a burning desire, even with a definite purpose and a specific plan, most people cannot hold it. Not because they are weak, because there is a force working against them that they do not understand. Hill called it the enemy within, and understanding it is the difference between everything working and nothing working at all. That is next. In part 3, we established desire, the burning obsession with a definite outcome, held with enough intensity that the mind stops negotiating with it and starts engineering toward it. But Hill knew something. He had studied enough people to know that desire alone, even white-hot burning desire, is not sufficient, because there is a mechanism inside the human mind that will dismantle even the most powerful desire if left unaddressed. And he addresses it in this chapter. He calls it faith. And what he means by that word is almost nothing like what most people think it means. When most people hear the word faith, they think of religion, of belief without evidence, of surrendering logic in favor of feeling. That is not what Hill means. Hill defines faith as a state of mind. Specifically, a state of mind that can be induced and maintained deliberately through the application of the principles he has already given you. Faith, in Hill's framework, is not passive. It is not something that happens to you. It is something you build through repetition, through autosuggestion, through the consistent, emotionally charged presentation of your desired outcome to your subconscious mind, until your subconscious accepts it as reality and begins producing the feelings, perceptions, and behaviors of someone for whom that outcome is inevitable. Faith is the state that exists when the subconscious believes. And when the subconscious believes, everything changes. This is where Hill introduces the principle of autosuggestion. And this is one of the most practically important chapters in the entire book, even though most people either dismiss it or misapply it completely. Autosuggestion is the process by which you deliberately feed your subconscious mind the thoughts, beliefs, and emotional states you want it to operate from. Hill was working from a framework that neuroscience has since confirmed in significant detail. The subconscious mind cannot distinguish between a real experience and a vividly imagined one presented with enough emotional intensity. This is not metaphor. This is mechanism. The same neural pathways that fire when you physically do something fire, when you vividly imagine doing it with full emotional engagement. Athletes know this. Surgeons know this. Performers know this. Hill knew it in 1937 before the neuroscience existed to explain why. But here's the part Hill is most concerned about in this chapter. And this is where most people's desire dies before it ever has a chance to become reality. He says that every human being comes into this life with the capacity for faith, the capacity to hold a vision and move toward it with complete conviction. And then life happens. The first failure, the first rejection, the first person who told you that what you wanted was not realistic. The first time you tried something and it did not work. And if you were not taught how to process those experiences correctly, they became evidence. Evidence that the outcome is not possible. Evidence that you specifically are not capable of producing it. Evidence that the desire is a fantasy rather than an inevitability delayed. And that evidence gets deposited into the subconscious. And from that point forward, your subconscious, which is supposed to be your most powerful ally, becomes the primary voice telling you to stop. Hill describes what we would now call the self-fulfilling prophecy, but he goes deeper than that phrase usually implies. He says that your subconscious mind is continuously broadcasting a signal, a frequency based on its dominant beliefs. And that frequency determines what you perceive, what you attract, what you are capable of noticing in your environment. Two people can walk into the same room with the same opportunity available to both of them. The person operating from faith, from a subconscious that believes in the definite outcome, will see the opportunity. will feel drawn toward the right conversation, the right connection, the right next step. The person operating from fear or doubt will walk past it completely, not because they are less intelligent, because their subconscious is tuned to a different frequency, looking for different evidence, confirming a different story. This is not spiritual language. This is how the reticular activating system in your brain actually works. It filters the world based on what your subconscious has been told matters. Hill called this infinite intelligence. We call it neuroscience. The mechanism is the same. So, how do you build faith when the evidence around you suggests the opposite? When the bank account does not reflect the vision? When the relationships do not reflect the identity? When every external data point is contradicting the story you are trying to install? Hill is clear about this. You do not wait for the evidence to change before you allow the belief. You build the belief first, deliberately, consistently, through the exact autosuggestion process he outlined. And the evidence follows. This sounds backwards to the logical mind. The logical mind says, "Show me the evidence and I will believe." Hill says the subconscious does not work that way. The subconscious needs the belief first, and once it has the belief, it begins finding, creating, and attracting the evidence that confirms it. The people who understand this build their internal world first and watch their external world reorganize itself around it. The people who do not spend their lives waiting for external conditions to change so they can finally feel different inside. They are waiting for something that will never come that way. Hill includes in this chapter what he calls a self-confidence formula, and I want to read you the essence of it because it is one of the most direct, practical tools in the book. He says, "First, I know that I have the ability to achieve the object of my definite purpose in life. Therefore, I demand of myself persistent, continuous action toward its attainment. Second, I realize the dominating thoughts of my mind will eventually reproduce themselves in outward physical action and gradually transform themselves into physical reality. Therefore, I will concentrate my thoughts for 30 minutes daily on the task of thinking of the person I intend to become. Third, I know that any desire I persistently hold in my mind will eventually seek expression through some practical means of attaining the object behind it. Therefore, I will devote 10 minutes daily to demanding of myself the development of the qualities I desire." Now, Hill is not giving you affirmations to make you feel good. He is giving you a structured daily practice for reprogramming the subconscious through consistent directed attention. Every minute of that practice is building faith in the technical sense, installing new dominant thoughts, retuning the frequency. Hill spends significant time in this section talking about fear, because he understands that fear and faith cannot occupy the same space in the mind simultaneously. They are mutually exclusive states. And most people, without knowing it, have allowed fear to become the dominant operating frequency of their subconscious. Not dramatic fear, not terror, the quiet, everyday fear that masquerades as practicality, as realism, as responsibility. The voice that says, "Be careful," the voice that says, "What if it does not work?" The voice that calculates all the ways the thing could go wrong before the thing has even been attempted. Hill identifies 6 basic fears that he says rob more people of achievement than any external circumstance ever could. The fear of poverty, the fear of criticism, the fear of ill health, the fear of loss of love, the fear of old age, and the fear of death. He says these 6 fears in various combinations account for virtually all human failure. Not lack of talent, not lack of opportunity, not lack of intelligence. Fear operating below the level of conscious awareness, quietly editing every decision, every risk, every moment of potential expansion. So here is what faith actually looks like as a practice. Not a feeling, not a belief you either have or you do not. A practice. You take your definite purpose, the one you wrote out at the end of part 3, and you add to it a faith statement, a clear declaration not of what you want, but of what you are becoming, written in the present tense. not I will be. I am, not I want to have. I have, not someday. Now. And you read this statement with the same emotional engagement Hill described. Twice daily, every day, without exception, regardless of what the external evidence says. You spend 30 minutes each day thinking about the version of yourself who has already achieved the definite outcome, not fantasizing, studying. What does that version of you think about? What does he do with his time? How does he carry himself? What decisions does he make automatically that you currently agonize over? You are building a blueprint in the subconscious, and the subconscious will begin moving you toward that blueprint with a consistency and resourcefulness that your conscious mind alone could never manufacture. This is the technology Hill is giving you. Most people read it and move on. The ones who use it, actually use it as a daily non-negotiable practice, find that the external world begins to look very different within weeks. Not because the world changed, because they are now perceiving it through a different internal filter. Desire gives you the direction. Faith gives you the internal state that makes movement toward that direction feel inevitable rather than impossible. But there is still a gap between the internal state and the physical result, and that gap is bridged by the next principle, one that Hill says is the connecting link between desire and its physical equivalent. He called it autosuggestion in depth, and it is where everything we have covered so far comes together into a single daily practice. That is next. In Part 4, we covered faith, the deliberately constructed internal state that bridges the gap between desire and its physical equivalent, the subconscious belief that makes the outcome feel inevitable before any external evidence exists to justify that feeling. Now Hill moves to the fourth principle, and this one is where a lot of people feel most comfortable, because it sounds the most practical, the most logical, the most like something the rational mind can work with. He calls it specialized knowledge. And then he immediately says something that shocks most people who encounter it for the first time. Hill says, knowledge is not power. He is directly contradicting one of the most repeated phrases in modern culture. Knowledge is power. Francis Bacon, repeated endlessly for 400 years. And Hill says, no, knowledge is only potential power. It becomes power only when it is organized into definite plans of action and directed toward a definite end. This distinction is everything, because we live in the most knowledge-rich environment in human history. More information is available to the average person today than was available to the most educated scholars of previous centuries. And yet the gap between those who achieve and those who do not has never been wider, because information alone does nothing. Organized, directed, applied knowledge, specialized knowledge, is what Hill is talking about. And it is a completely different thing. Hill makes a clear distinction between general knowledge and specialized knowledge. General knowledge, no matter how vast, is of little use in the accumulation of money or the achievement of any definite purpose. The universities are full of people with enormous general knowledge who have never produced anything of significant value with it. Not because they are not intelligent, because general knowledge is not organized around a definite purpose. Specialized knowledge is different. It is the deep, specific understanding of a particular field, problem, or domain that allows you to provide value that the general market cannot easily replicate. And here is what Hill says next that most people miss completely. You do not need to possess the specialized knowledge yourself. You need to know how to access it and how to organize it around your definite purpose. This is one of the most liberating ideas in the entire book, because it means the limits of your own knowledge are not the limits of what you can achieve. This is where the mastermind principle from Part 2 connects directly to specialized knowledge. Hill says that one of the primary functions of the Mastermind Alliance is to provide access to specialized knowledge that the individual does not possess. Ford understood this completely. Henry Ford had almost no formal education. He could not perform complex mathematical calculations. He had no advanced engineering training. What he had was a burning desire, an unshakable faith, and the intelligence to surround himself with people whose specialized knowledge he could organize and direct toward his definite purpose. Hill tells the story of a lawyer who tried to embarrass Ford in court by demonstrating his ignorance of basic historical and scientific facts. Ford's response was legendary. He said, "I have a row of electric push buttons on my desk. When I want to know something, I push a button and call in the person who knows it. I am equipped with men who can give me any knowledge I require. Why should I clutter my mind with general knowledge in order to answer your foolish questions?" Hill says this is not ignorance. This is wisdom. The wisdom to understand that organized access to specialized knowledge is more valuable than the attempt to possess all knowledge personally. Hill identifies several sources of specialized knowledge: your own experience and education, the experience and education of others through the Mastermind Alliance, universities and technical schools, public libraries and research, and, perhaps most relevant to the world we are operating in now, the Internet. Hill could not have imagined the access we have today. Every domain of specialized knowledge ever documented by human beings is available to anyone with a phone and 30 minutes of focused attention. And yet most people use that access to consume entertainment, to scroll, to be passively informed about things that have no bearing on their definite purpose. Hill's point is not that information is scarce. It never was, and it certainly is not now. His point is that without a definite purpose to organize it around, all the information in the world produces nothing. The question is not, what do you know? The question is, what specific knowledge, organized in what specific way, directed toward what specific outcome, would produce the result you have decided to achieve? Hill addresses the education system directly in this chapter, and what he says is as relevant now as it was in 1937. He says the word educate derives from the Latin educere, meaning to draw out or to develop from within, not to pour in from without. But the modern education system, in Hill's time and certainly in ours, does almost the opposite. It pours in general knowledge with no particular organization around the individual's definite purpose, and then measures success by the ability to reproduce that knowledge on demand. Hill is not anti-education. He is anti-confusion of education with preparation. He says, the person who stops studying merely because they have finished school is forever hopelessly undereducated. Any person who is educated is one who has learned to get whatever they want in life without violating the rights of others. Education is not what you have been taught. It is the capacity to direct your own learning toward your own definite purpose with discipline and consistency. Most people graduate from formal education and stop learning deliberately. The high achievers Hill studied never stopped. They just got more specific about what they were learning and why. So here is what specialized knowledge looks like as a practice. First, identify the specific knowledge required to achieve your definite purpose. Not all knowledge. The specific knowledge. What do you need to understand that you do not currently understand? What skills do you need to develop that you do not currently have? What information do you need access to that you do not currently possess? Be surgical about this. Most people try to learn everything about a field. Hill says learn what you need for the specific purpose. Second, identify the most efficient source of that knowledge. Is it a person, a book, a course, a mentor, a mastermind partner who already has it? Is it your own experimentation and observation? Third, organize the acquisition of that knowledge into your daily practice. Not occasionally, consistently. Hill believed that 30 to 60 minutes of daily directed learning toward your definite purpose compounds over time in a way that eventually produces a level of specialized knowledge that the market cannot easily replicate or replace. And that is where leverage comes from. Not from working harder, from knowing something or being able to do something that few others know or can do at your level. Hill makes an observation in this chapter that is more relevant now than ever. He says that specialized knowledge can be translated into money only through the use of a definite plan. The person who has specialized knowledge and no plan is simply educated. The person who has a plan and no specialized knowledge is simply ambitious. The person who has both, who has developed deep specific competence in something the market values, and has a clear organized plan for directing that competence toward a definite financial outcome, is the person Hill is describing throughout this entire book. This is why so many talented people remain undercompensated. They have developed genuine specialized knowledge, but they have no definite plan for converting that knowledge into value that the market will pay for. And without the plan, the knowledge sits, unmonetized, underutilized, eventually forgotten. The plan is not separate from the knowledge. It is the mechanism that gives the knowledge its power. There is something underneath this principle that connects back to everything Hill has said before. He talks about how the acquisition of specialized knowledge, when pursued with faith and burning desire, begins to attract opportunities that would not otherwise be visible. This is the reticular activating system again. When you commit to developing deep knowledge in a specific domain, when that commitment is backed by genuine desire and genuine faith, your subconscious begins filtering your environment for opportunities, connections, and information relevant to that domain. You start seeing things you would have walked past before, meeting people who have exactly the piece you were missing, finding the book at exactly the right moment. This is not coincidence. It is your subconscious, tuned to the right frequency by desire and faith, doing exactly what it was built to do, finding the evidence that confirms the belief, creating the conditions that advance the purpose. Hill says, this is why you must begin acquiring specialized knowledge before you feel ready, because the act of beginning is itself the signal to the subconscious that the purpose is real, and the subconscious responds to real. Desire, faith, specialized knowledge, 3 of the 13 principles. And already we are operating at a level most people never reach. But there is a faculty that Hill says underlies all of it, the one that produces the plans, the ideas, the solutions that none of the other principles can manufacture on their own. He called it imagination. And what he says about it in the next chapter will change how you understand every creative and strategic thought you have ever had. That is next. In Part 5, we covered specialized knowledge, the understanding that knowledge itself is not power. It is only potential power, until it is organized and directed toward a definite purpose. But that raises an obvious question. Organized by what? Directed by what? What is the faculty that takes raw knowledge, raw desire, raw faith, and actually shapes them into a plan, an idea, a solution that did not exist before? Hill says there is exactly one faculty capable of that. He calls it imagination. And he says something about it that most people, even now, have never properly understood. Hill calls imagination literally the workshop of the mind. Every plan, every invention, every business, every solution to every problem that has ever existed began as a thought shape in someone's imagination before it existed anywhere else. This sounds obvious when stated plainly. But Hill is not stating it as a passing observation. He is stating it as the central operating mechanism behind everything covered so far. Desire gives you the target. Faith gives you the belief that the target is reachable. Specialized knowledge gives you the raw material. But imagination is the faculty that actually does the work of combining desire, faith, and knowledge into something that did not exist a moment before. Without imagination, desire is just longing, faith is just hope, and specialized knowledge is just information sitting in storage. Imagination is where they become something. Hill identifies 2 distinct forms of imagination, and the distinction matters enormously. The first is synthetic imagination. This is where you take existing ideas, concepts, or plans and arrange them into new combinations. This is how most invention and innovation actually happens. Almost nothing is created from absolute nothing. Most breakthrough ideas are existing pieces rearranged in a way nobody had previously arranged them. The second is creative imagination. This is the faculty through which Hill says the finite mind of man has direct communication with infinite intelligence. This is where hunches, inspirations, and ideas seem to arrive from outside the normal thinking process. The flash of insight, the solution that arrives in the shower, the idea that wakes you up at 3 in the morning fully formed. Hill says, creative imagination operates more powerfully when the conscious mind is stimulated through the practice of the other principles, when it is vibrating at a rapid rate through the use of desire, faith, and emotional intensity. Most people only ever access synthetic imagination, and even that rarely and accidentally. Hill is telling you both forms can be developed and used deliberately. Here is the part of this chapter that Hill is most direct about. He says imagination, like any other faculty of the mind, becomes weak through inaction and stronger through use. And then he makes an observation about modern life that was true in 1937 and is almost unbelievably more true now. He says most people stop using their imagination somewhere around childhood, not because they lose the capacity, because the systems they move through, school, work, social conformity, actively discourage its use. Children are constantly told to be realistic, to stop daydreaming, to focus on what is practical. And by the time most people reach adulthood, the muscle of imagination has gone almost completely unused for decades. Hill's point is not nostalgic, it is functional. If imagination is the workshop where desire, faith, and knowledge get assembled into plans, and that workshop has been closed and unused for 30 years, then no matter how strong your desire or how developed your faith, you have no functioning mechanism for actually producing the plan. You have the raw materials, the factory is shut down, so how does Hill say you reopen it? The same way you would restart any atrophied muscle, through deliberate, consistent use, starting small and building capacity over time. He suggests setting aside time daily specifically for the use of imagination, in service of your definite purpose. Not vague daydreaming, directed imaginative work. Sitting with your definite purpose and asking, what would this look like if it were fully realized? What would the day-to-day experience of that outcome actually involve? What problems would need to be solved to get there? And what might the solutions look like? Hill is describing what we would now call visualization, but with a crucial difference from how the term is often used today. He is not describing passive fantasy about an outcome. He is describing active mental rehearsal, imagining not just the destination but the process, the obstacles, the decisions, the version of yourself who navigates all of it successfully. This is imagination as a working tool, not a wish. Hill connects imagination directly to what he calls the master plan, the practical strategy for achieving your definite purpose, and he makes a point that contradicts how most people approach planning. He says do not wait until you have a perfect plan to begin. Use your imagination to create the best plan you can right now, with the knowledge and resources currently available to you, and then begin. If the plan fails, use your imagination again to create a new plan, and try again. Hill says failure of a plan is simply information. It tells you what does not work, which is valuable data for what your imagination produces next. The person who refuses to act until the plan is perfect will never act, because perfect plans do not exist in advance. They emerge through the cycle of imagining, acting, observing, and reimagining. This is why Hill earlier insisted on beginning at once, whether you are ready or not. Imagination is not a one-time event that produces a finished blueprint. It is an ongoing faculty you return to again and again throughout the entire process. There is a connection here back to the mastermind principle that Hill makes explicit. He says that imagination operates more powerfully in the presence of other minds operating in harmony around a shared purpose. This is part of what he means by the third mind. When two or more people genuinely aligned on a definite purpose begin thinking together, the synthetic imagination of the group can produce combinations that neither individual's imagination would have produced alone. Ideas bounce, combine, mutate, improve. This is why Hill places such enormous emphasis on who you think with, not just who you spend time with. If your primary thinking partners have weak or unused imaginations themselves, conversations stay at the level of complaint, gossip, or repetition of existing opinions. If your thinking partners have strong, active imaginations directed at meaningful purposes, every conversation becomes a kind of collaborative workshop. Hill is describing, in 1937, what we would now recognize as the difference between an environment that produces innovation and one that does not. So here's what this looks like as a daily practice. First, recognize that imagination is a muscle, and if it has gone unused for years, the early sessions will feel awkward, slow, even unproductive. That is normal. That is the muscle waking up. Second, set aside dedicated time, even just 15 to 20 minutes, specifically for imaginative work on your definite purpose. Not planning in the sense of logistics and checklists. Imagining. What does the realized version of this look like? What does it feel like? What would need to be true for it to exist? What combinations of existing ideas, resources, or relationships might produce a path toward it? Third, write down what comes, even if it seems incomplete or unrealistic. Hill is clear that judgment and refinement come later. The first job of imagination is generation, not evaluation. If you evaluate while you generate, you shut the workshop down before it produces anything. Fourth, when you hit a wall, a problem, an obstacle, bring it back into the workshop. Sit with it the same way. Most people treat obstacles as reasons to stop. Hill treats them as raw material for the next imaginative session. The obstacle is not the end of the process. It is the next input. There is something underneath this chapter that ties back to everything before it. Hill is describing across this entire book a single integrated system. Desire creates the target and the emotional charge. Faith creates the belief that removes the internal resistance to pursuing the target. Specialized knowledge provides the raw material the mind has to work with, and imagination is the faculty that processes all of it, combining, generating, problem-solving, producing the plans that desire and faith then give you the conviction to actually execute. None of these operate in isolation. They are stages of a single continuous process. And Hill's argument, underneath all the individual chapters, is that this process is available to everyone, all the time, whether they are using it deliberately or not. The only question is whether it is running on a definite purpose you chose, or on whatever inherited fears, doubts, and distractions happen to be loudest. Desire, faith, specialized knowledge, imagination, 4 principles that together form the internal architecture of achievement. But none of it produces anything in the real world without one more thing. A bridge between the internal world and external action. Hill calls it organized planning. And it is where everything we have covered stops being internal and starts becoming visible. That is next. In Part 6, we covered imagination, the workshop of the mind, where desire, faith, and specialized knowledge get assembled into something new. But a plan that exists only in the imagination is still just a thought. Hill's next principle is the bridge between everything we have built so far and the external world where results actually appear. He calls it organized planning. Hill says ideas are the beginning points of all fortunes, but ideas are intangibles. They have no value until they are organized into definite plans of action. Everything we have built across desire, faith, specialized knowledge, and imagination is still intangible until it becomes a plan. Not a feeling, not a belief, a plan. Written, specific, actionable. The internal work is the foundation, but the plan is where thought becomes thing. Hill brings the mastermind back here. He says, no individual has sufficient experience, education, native ability, and knowledge to ensure success without the cooperation of others. Whatever your plan requires that you do not have, skill, capital, knowledge, time, go to the people who have it and form an alliance in a spirit of harmony around your purpose. Most plans fail, not because the idea was bad, but because the planner tried to execute alone what required a team. This is the part most people need to hear most. Hill says plainly, if your first plan fails, replace it with a new plan. If that fails, replace it again until you find one that works. He says this is exactly where most people give up, not because their desire was weak, because they treated the failure of the plan as evidence about themselves, rather than information about the plan. A failed plan is data. A failed person is a story you tell yourself about that data. The first interpretation keeps you moving. The second stops you completely. So here is the full architecture. You begin with desire, a burning, specific outcome, written down, with a deadline and a price you're willing to pay. You build faith through daily autosuggestion, training your subconscious to operate from inevitability. You acquire specialized knowledge, the specific competence your purpose requires, sourced from wherever it exists. You use imagination daily to generate plans and treat obstacles as raw material, not verdicts. And you build organized plans, written, specific, and revised relentlessly every time they fail, without ever turning that failure into a story about your own limitations. This is not a sequence you do once. It is a cycle. Desire sets the direction. Faith removes the resistance. Knowledge and imagination produce the plan. The plan meets reality. Reality gives you new information. You revise and continue, anchored to the same desire for as long as it takes. His book has sold over 100 million copies, and the overwhelming majority were read once, found mildly inspiring, and placed back on a shelf. The information was never the bottleneck. It never is. The bottleneck is always whether the reader is willing to do the actual work. Write the definite purpose, read it daily, spend time on imagination, build the plan, watch it fail, build another, for as long as it takes. Most people will not. Not because they're incapable, because they were never shown what was actually being asked of them. You have now been shown. The principles are not complicated. What they require is a decision, not a wish. A decision, definite, specific, and held. If this overview gave you something to think about, that is the entire point of this channel. We take ideas like this and break down the architecture underneath them. Not just what successful people do, but how their minds actually operate, and how yours can too. Subscribe, like, and share with others who may be in need. And if you're ready to start applying this, start tonight. Write the definite purpose. That is step one. Everything else follows from that.